Welcome to Module 3 of the Climate Adaptation and Resilience Training Programme. This training is funded by Welsh Government and aims to help Welsh food and drink producers prepare for and adapt to climate change. In this session, we'll focus on how climate change can affect your premises and access routes. A workbook is available which supports this session and contains checklists, templates, and practical tools to help you take action. Whether your business operates out of a single unit, a rural production site, or a modern factory on an industrial estate, climate impacts on infrastructure and access are critical considerations. And if you rely on third-party manufacturers or co-packers, the points that we cover in this module apply equally to them. It's essential that their sites and the access routes to them are equally resilient. We're now looking at premises and access routes as the first of the critical climate points in the CASSET model. If you haven't already completed modules 1 and 2, we strongly encourage you to go back and review those first, as they provide a valuable foundation to climate impacts and risk management principles. In this module, we will identify the risks to your premises and surrounding infrastructure. We'll focus on flooding, which is Wales's most significant climate risk. We'll cover how to categorise your critical business assets. And we'll also consider the impact of access route disruption on your business, even if your own site remains unaffected by a climate event. This slide shows some of the direct and indirect climate change risks that might impact your premises and access routes. Examples of direct risks include flooding and storm damage, whereas indirect risks can include pest infestations, power cuts, blocked supply routes, loss of utilities. The Module 3 workbook has a link to an editable template for this matrix, so you can add the risks and impacts which might be relevant to your location and help you prepare for possible scenarios. A practical and low-cost step you can take now is to add a climate lens to your regular site walks and inspections when you review the buildings, structures and landscape around your site. Try walking your site in different weather conditions, after heavy rainfall or on a windy day, or after prolonged dry spells. You'll spot risks you might otherwise miss. Use the risk assessment framework from Module 2 to prioritise which adaptations are urgent to avoid future damage and cost. Investing now in repairs and maintenance is likely to be cheaper than repairing major storm or flood damage, especially when that's combined with the loss of revenue whilst your site has been out of action. Flooding is one of the main significant climate risks for Wales, so we're going to spend some time looking at this. This slide highlights the two different types of flooding that can occur, fluvial and pluvial, and you may need to interact with different organisations depending on which type is occurring. Fluvial flooding happens when rivers, reservoirs and other watercourses overflow into the surrounding land and buildings. Natural Resources Wales is the lead body, and they have lots of information on their website. Pluvial flooding happens when public drainage systems and sewers are overwhelmed by extreme rainfall. The water companies are usually responsible up to the property boundary, and then the property owner is responsible within the property boundaries. The Ofwat website is another useful resource for further information. This table from Natural Resources Wales highlights how flood risks are expected to increase significantly over the next century. More homes, more businesses, and key services are likely to be affected. This is an important consideration for your own site, but also for your staff, suppliers, and logistics providers who may be located in those key risk locations. Natural Resources Wales also oversees flood and coastal erosion risk management in Wales. These maps show their 6 operational areas, also known as NRW places, and the locations of communities at risk from river and sea flooding. You can check the flood risk of your location through the NRW's interactive map on their website. This slide highlights some practical questions to ask yourself to assess if your site or access routes are at risk from flooding. These questions will also help guide your future flood planning, as we'll explore in the next few slides. The workbook for Module 3 contains some suggestions for creating your flood plan and how to stay alert to the risk of a flood. You can sign up for flood alerts and warnings from Natural Resources Wales, which they send out depending on the level of risk and severity of anticipated flood events. In addition, the UK Met Office issue colour-coded warnings which may refer to expected weather conditions. For example, amber warning rain or red warning snow. You will need to decide at what point you trigger your flood plan, and one of the key factors is to consider when a flood is imminent, what assets you need to try to protect. This slide shows how you can categorize your assets into a pyramid, with the peak of the pyramid being those assets which are most critical to your business. Your operations would grind to a halt without them, and they would be nearly impossible to replace or repair at short notice. Moving down the pyramid, these are assets which are important, but perhaps you could manage for a couple of hours or a day or so without them. At the bottom of the pyramid are those assets which are useful, but you could run your business for several days or maybe even a week or so without them, or they are easily replaceable if damaged. Having done this categorization, it makes it easier to focus your attention on the most critical ones when you write your flood plan or develop protocols for dealing with any other type of emergency. This planning also helps to prioritize investment in any flood protection or prevention measures. You'll need to invest in protecting those assets which are most critical to your food or drink manufacturing business. And of course, this planning helps you decide what needs to be protected or moved first in the event of an emergency. Just as a quick reminder, critical assets can be found throughout your business, ranging from the buildings and built facilities within your site and the specialist areas such as blast freezers and manufacturing kit and equipment. You might have key stocks of packaging and storage areas that would be expensive to replace and would need to be removed or protected in the event of a flood or other climate event. What about your finished goods? Can they be protected or moved so that you can fulfill immediate orders? Think about what you would save and what you could live without. Paying attention to weather or flood warnings could give you much needed time to move what you can to safer ground or move stock, assets, and other business critical items onto high level racking. Whilst we have focused on flooding in this module as one of Wales's biggest climate risks, you should also consider how other climate changes could impact your premises and access routes. Wind damage from storms is also a high risk for Wales. What damage could you prevent by ensuring your planned maintenance keeps on top of those vulnerable points which you identified in your site walks? Wild or grass flyers are an increasing threat which is no longer confined to rural areas, and our wetter winters and warmer, drier summers, springs, and autumns will lead to more risks from subsidence as the soil goes through cycles of expansion and contraction. How might these cycles affect your buildings? Having considered the impacts on your premises, let's now move on to your access routes. Wales's landscape and industrial heritage presents its own challenges, and landslips, fallen trees, and damaged bridges are already regular occurrences. If access is cut off, how will this affect your deliveries and dispatch? And what about staff travel and whether they can get to your site? You can take time to map the main routes to your site and any other business locations. Thinking about access routes is also important for your future planning. For example, if your business is growing and you anticipate that you might need to move premises in several years, then adding a climate risk impact to your decision making and due diligence, both in terms of your potential premises and access routes, will help to embed future resilience. Future sites should be assessed not only for convenience and cost, but for vulnerability to climate risks. There are some very practical ways to assess the critical and alternative routes to and from your premises. As with the site walks, test them in different weather conditions, safely, of course. Ask yourself which routes are vulnerable to snow, floods, or storms, or different weather conditions. Are there any viable alternative routes to and from your premises? These types of questions will help you to consider the implications on your business if routes are closed or impassable. This brings us to the end of Module 3, so let's recap on what we've covered. We've looked at direct and indirect climate risks to your premises and access routes. We've explored the importance of site walks in different weather conditions and completing risk assessments with a climate focus. We've focused on Wales's biggest risk, which is flooding, and how to plan for it. And we've considered how route disruption can jeopardize your operations even if your site is unaffected. Here are some practical actions for you to take away from this module. Who will take responsibility for risk assessing your premises and access routes for climate impacts? And who will do site walks and access route mapping? Who maintains and updates the asset register? And what team members should be involved in deciding which assets are most critical? And who should sign up for flood and weather warnings? If you want to have a deeper dive into the climate risks and impacts on your food or drink operations and production processes, then please do continue on to Module 4. Thank you for joining us for Module 3. Don't forget to refer to the workbook. It's full of useful tools, links and resources to support your climate adaptation journey.